welcome to IDDTalks here at ADA University. My name is Anastasia Lavrina, and now I'm joined by an expert from Washington, D.C., United States of America, Oubai Shahbandar, defense analyst. Welcome.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Let me start with a question about third Global Shusha Media Forum. You were among the participants, held in the cultural capital of Azerbaijan, Shusha city. And the question is, how do you assess the role of this forum in shaping the international media narratives about the South Caucasus?
Well, I think there was no question that this Shusha Global Media Forum certainly had a major global impact, particularly when it came to the international headlines that came out from the meetings and the discussions and the statements from the Shusha Global Media Forum, particularly given President Ilham Aliyev's press conference in the city of Khan Kendi. And I think the fact that you had so many international participants from the United States all the way to East Asia and Africa, from essentially all continents, in Shusha, in the newly rebuilt city of Shusha in Karabakh, I think was really a testament to how this global media conference, which is relatively new amongst the ecosystem of global conferences, is already having an impact on such a relatively short time span. And given President Aliyev's multiple statements, his 2-hour news conference with international media, multiple languages, and from my perspective, covering the United States on how President Aliyev's comments on the relationship with President Trump and the bilateral diplomatic relationship between the United States and Azerbaijan, those statements were picked up by American media. We saw President Trump post President Aliyev's warm statements praising President Trump's peace vision and the need for a stronger relationship between Azerbaijan and the United States. And the fact that President Trump posted that video from the Shusha Global Media Forum, from that statement in Khan Kendi by President Aliyev, I think that really speaks volumes on just how impactful this conference in Shusha, and of course that press conference in Khan Kendi, really that massive impact, and the fact that the American media and the global media were taking note.
Well, Oubai, if I'm not mistaken, you had a chance to ask a question from the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, at the forum. The question was about the relations between the United States and Azerbaijan. So how do you think? I want to know your personal understanding of the situation. How would you describe the current level of the U.S.-Azerbaijan relations, particularly in the context of regional security and the perspective for the future cooperation in this post-conflict reality?
Look, I think it was very significant. I mean, it was very clearly President Aliyev wanted to send a statement that it was time for a reset in the relations between Baku and Washington, D.C. From what we heard from President Aliyev in Khan Kendi during his press conference was that the relationship between the United States and Azerbaijan had suffered greatly during the previous term of President Biden in those 4 years, but that he was hopeful given the fact that President Trump in his first term had no wars, had a vision for peace, that his policy also really focused on strengthening the family values shared by the Azerbaijani people, that President Aliyev, based on his statement, was hopeful for a new page of relations between the United States and Azerbaijan. It was a great opportunity for me to have been able to ask President Aliyev where he viewed the future trajectory of those relations between the United States and Azerbaijan. And based on his response, to my question, was clear that there is not only a leadership to leadership respect between President Aliyev and President Trump, but there is also a great deal of potential for security cooperation and energy cooperation and potentially American investment in Azerbaijan, and that given the real likelihood for new positive relations between the two countries, we do know that President Trump loves building a business-to-business relationship and a leadership-to-leadership relationship. So from my perspective, given what we heard from President Aliyev, I think you can expect more higher level engagement between Azerbaijan and the United States, given the statements that we heard in Khankendi during the Global Shusha Media Forum. And I think that means better security in the region, in the South Caucasus, in the Middle East, particularly in Syria, where the United States has national security equities, where Azerbaijan is heavily engaged with Israel, with Azerbaijan just hosting a Syrian delegation and an Israeli delegation, trying to bridge the divide between Damascus and Jerusalem. So I think the United States and Azerbaijan could very well cooperate, not only on a business to business and on trade relations, but also on the strategic security level in the South, to bring stability in the South Caucasus and the wider Middle East.
Well, it seems that the United States is willing to be involved in the processes taking place in the region of the South Caucasus, including those statements about the private company of the United States to take place in the future development of Zangezur Corridor, and then the statement made by President Donald Trump about the resolved conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So from your own perspective, how the US diplomacy is evolving in the region, given the shifting geopolitical balance and actually reduced direct engagement from some Western countries?
Well, what we've heard from the White House is that a finalized peace deal between Azerbaijan and Armenia will very much be welcomed by the United States and by the Trump administration. And the Trump administration, based on President Trump's legacy of peace, with what he did with the Abraham Accords with Israel and a number of Arab countries, that the Trump administration wants to build that bridge and provide diplomatic support to help those peace negotiations between Azerbaijan and Armenia reach that final step and eventually be concluded and finalized. So that is certainly in the interests of the Trump administration, based on the statements that we've heard from President Trump, that he very much is keenly aware of those peace negotiations, and the fact that the United States can perhaps play a role from a business perspective in trying to resolve the final discussions on the Zangezur Corridor and what that corridor would look like, going through the southern part of Armenia, connecting Azerbaijan to Nakhchivan, which is part of the agreement existing between Azerbaijan and Armenia. But as we say here in the United States, the devil is in the details. And this is where the United States can perhaps play an active role with President Trump's leadership in trying to bridge those final areas of dispute between Azerbaijan and Armenia on who will manage the Armenian part, on the Armenian territory part of the Zangezur Corridor. And I think that you will now have a more willing partner here with the Trump administration that will work with Azerbaijan and Armenia to finalize that peace deal. Of course, we heard from President Aliyev that the big problem in the previous administrations was that there was clearly a bias, and there was clearly an anti-Azerbaijan bias with the Biden administration. That was the perspective coming from Baku. The perspective now is that the Trump administration wants peace, where all sides can win and where the United States can play an active role. And perhaps a peace deal between Azerbaijan and Armenia can be yet another major peace achievement by the Trump administration that is certainly looking to build upon its legacy of the Abraham Accords.
Oubai, it's important to understand how exactly the United States see the future of Zangezur Corridor. Geographically, the location, the distance is far away, and this is a small project. I mean, the small project taking the length of that, which actually very important for the region of the South Caucasus, for the future transport connection between Europe and Asia. But the United States of America, how do you think this project is important for the administration in the White House, what are the geopolitical expectations and the consequences?
That's a very good point. President Trump, he always says, hey, the United States is separated by two big, beautiful oceans, right? We've heard the president say this on a number of occasions. In the South Caucasus, I mean, it's so far away from the United States. You can't. Now, of course, the United States has interests in every corner of the world, being the world's largest economy, with U.S. military forces deployed on practically every continent, with for the longest time, with the U.S. military presence in Afghanistan and Central Asia, there was a direct military interest in working closely with Azerbaijan. But again, as we heard from President Aliyev and Khan Kindi, once the Americans left Afghanistan, all of a sudden, the bilateral talks and cooperation between Washington and Baku essentially slowed down and came to a halt once the direct American national security interest was no longer there, with Afghanistan being no longer an issue. And of course, with the United States had previously depended upon Azerbaijan as being a major transit hub and line of supply and communication for its forces in Afghanistan. Now, with the United States, of course, under President Trump, it's America first. That is the foreign policy of the United States. And with President Trump really focusing on trade, on making sure that American businesses have access to markets throughout the world. And this is where many analysts say there's a potential convergence of interests between Azerbaijan and the United States, given that Azerbaijan would look to international investments in its energy projects. And this is a place that American businesses had previously not really done any type of never had that type of heavy involvement in the energy sector. So this is potentially a new market for American business interests. And I think certainly that will factor heavily in President Trump's future engagement with Azerbaijan. But also, it's a matter of the two leaders working with each other and talking to each other directly. That's how President Trump does business on the geopolitical level. He talks to other world leaders directly. He text messages them. He WhatsApps them. He builds that direct leadership to leadership relationship. And given the similarities in between President Trump and President Aliyev on the personality wise, I think those two leaders will be able to develop, more than likely, I could be wrong, but I think I'm right on this, a very strong partnership in the future. And I think that will factor heavily in how the United States navigates its relationships in the South Caucasus. And, look, there's no American military forces in the South Caucasus, but stability there is certainly important to the United States, given that Iran is right there, that Russia is right there. And these are two countries that the United States has heavy national security equities and involvement. So this makes Azerbaijan integral for American policy on not only in the Middle East, but also throughout Eurasia.
Well, Oubai, thank you. Thank you so much for joining IDDTalks.
Thank you.